The battle above the shattered moon of Kael'thir was already over. It just hadn't stopped yet. Fragments of destroyed fleets drifted in slow, silent orbits. Burning hulls, ruptured engines, lifeless bodies tumbling endlessly through the void. What had once been a coordinated Allied defense was now nothing more than a graveyard. Commander Elira stood motionless at the center of her command deck, her eyes fixed on the main viewport. The glow of distant explosions reflected faintly across her face, but she didn't react anymore. There were no orders left to give that would change anything. "Shields at 9%, her tactical officer said quietly. No panic, no urgency, just acceptance. Another Allied cruiser vanished in a flash of white light. "Gone." "Communications?" Elira asked, though she already knew the answer. "Silence across all channels. We're the last organized unit in range." Of course we are, she thought. The Zarath Dominion didn't just defeat fleets, they erased them. Their ships moved with terrifying precision, their weapons bending energy in ways no one else understood. They didn't overwhelm through numbers, they dismantled through perfection. And now that perfection was closing in. "Enemy formations tightening," the AI reported. "They're preparing a final strike." Elira exhaled slowly, all remaining power to forward shields. It wouldn't matter. Nothing would. Around her, the crew carried on with quiet discipline. No shouting, no desperation, just professionals facing the inevitable. That at least gave her a strange sense of pride. "Commander," a young officer hesitated. "Permission to send a final message home." Elira paused. For a moment, the war disappeared. She imagined distant worlds, cities still intact, skies untouched by war, families who believed their defenders would return. "Granted," she said softly. The officer nodded and turned away, already recording. Elira forced herself to look back at the battlefield. The Zarath ships were moving into position now, forming a perfect arc around her remaining vessels. Elegant, calculated, unstoppable. "Time to impact?" she asked. 40 seconds. 40 seconds. That was all that remained of everything they had fought for. Then, "Commander, we have a new contact." Elira frowned. "From where?" A pause. "Unknown." That got her attention. "Display it." The main screen flickered. At first there was nothing, just the empty void at the far edge of the battlefield. Then a signal blinked into existence. No warp flare, no detectable approach vector, just suddenly there. A ship. Elira leaned forward slightly. It didn't look like anything she had ever seen. Where Zarath ships were sleek and luminous, this vessel was dark and angular. Its surface was uneven, scarred, layered with thick armor plating that looked almost crude. "Is that damage?" someone whispered. "No," another replied. "That's how it's built." The ship moved forward slowly, deliberately, like it wasn't concerned with the battle at all. "Scanning," the AI said. "No energy shielding detected, power output inconsistent, weapon systems unclassified." "Unclassified?" Elira repeated. "That is correct. I cannot identify their technology." A murmur spread across the bridge. Even the Zarath tech could be analyzed. But this... nothing. Then something even stranger happened. The Zarath fleet stopped. Not completely, but enough. Their perfect formation faltered for just a fraction of a second. "They've detected it too," Elira said quietly. "Why aren't they firing?" her tactical officer asked. No one had an answer. The unknown ship continued forward, drifting past the wreckage of entire fleets as if it didn't belong in the same reality. Then a transmission signal appeared. "Incoming message," the comms officer said. "Origin that vessel." "Put it through." Static filled the bridge, harsh, distorted, like the signal itself was forcing its way across incompatible systems. For a moment, it was just noise. Then, a voice, rough, calm, unafraid. "You picked the wrong species." Silence followed, not just on the bridge, across the entire battlefield. Elira felt something shift in the air, something she couldn't name, something unfamiliar. The Zarath formation tightened again, but it wasn't the same. There was hesitation now. Tiny, but real. The unknown warship didn't slow. Didn't turn. Didn't wait. It kept moving forward, straight toward the most powerful fleet in the galaxy. Alone, Elira stared at the image, her pulse steady but her thoughts racing. "One ship," she whispered. Behind her, someone said what everyone was thinking. "That's not enough." Elira didn't respond, because as she watched that dark, scarred vessel advance into certain death, she realized something didn't feel right. Not about the ship, not about the situation, about the feeling growing in her chest. It wasn't hope. Not yet. But it was close. And for the first time since the battle began, Commander Elira wasn't sure how this would end. Because something had just entered the battlefield that didn't follow the rules, the silence didn't last. The Zarath Dominion had not built its empire on hesitation. "Unidentified vessel," the Zarath High Commander transmitted across the battlefield, his voice cold, precise. "You have entered a restricted war zone. Withdraw immediately or be erased." The message echoed across every frequency, translated, amplified, undeniable. On Elira's bridge, no one moved. The unknown ship didn't respond. It didn't slow. It didn't change course. It simply kept moving forward, straight toward the heart of the Zarath formation. "Commander," Elira's tactical officer whispered, "they're going to fire." She nodded once. "Of course they are." There was no warning. No countdown. The Zarath didn't believe in ceremony. A wave of energy erupted from their front line, bright, concentrated, overwhelming. It surged across the void like a collapsing star, distorting space as it traveled. Even from a distance, Elira's ship trembled as the shockwave passed. "That level of output," someone gasped, "it's enough to vaporize a moon." The unknown ship disappeared inside the blast. Completely consumed. Light swallowed everything. Sensors overloaded. Visual feeds dissolved into static. For 3 full seconds, the battlefield ceased to exist. Elira didn't speak. Didn't breathe. Because she had already seen this before. Nothing survived a direct Zarath strike like that. Nothing. "Contact lost," the AI confirmed. "Of course it is," she thought. Around her, the crew began to shift, some turning away, others lowering their heads. It was over before it had even begun. Whatever that ship was, it never stood a chance. Then, "Wait." The word cut through the silence. "Repeat that," Elira said sharply. The AI hesitated. "Contact reacquired." The bridge froze. "What?" her tactical officer said, almost laughing in disbelief. "Reading confirms the unidentified vessel is still active." "That's not possible." But it was. The light began to fade. Slowly, the blinding glare of the explosion receded, revealing the void once more. And something inside it. Moving. The ship emerged from the dying glow like something dragged out of a nightmare. Its hull was burning, sections of armor torn away, exposing internal structures that sparked and vented atmosphere into space. Entire segments were blackened, melted, or missing entirely. But it was still there. Still moving forward. "No shields," the AI whispered, almost uncertain. "No regenerative systems detected." "Then how is it still intact?" someone asked. No one answered. Because there was no answer. The Zarath fleet didn't wait this time. A second wave of fire erupted, more focused, more precise. Dozens of ships aligned their weapons, converging their beams into a single, devastating strike. The human ship didn't evade. Didn't retreat. It adjusted its trajectory, slightly. "Forward." "Is it accelerating?" Elira asked. "Yes," the AI confirmed. "It's increasing speed." "Into the attack." "Yes." That made no sense. Even the most advanced civilizations prioritized survival, maneuvering, shielding, retreating when necessary. This ship did none of that. It was moving like it didn't care if it survived. The second strike hit. Harder. Sharper. The ship's surface erupted in explosions, fire blooming across its hull, debris tearing away in chunks. One entire section seemed to collapse inward, vanishing into a storm of sparks and fragments. Still, it moved. Damage critical, the AI said. Multiple hull breaches detected, internal atmosphere venting. And yet, no change in course. Elira felt something cold settle in her chest. What kind of species builds a ship like that? She murmured. Before anyone could answer, the ship fired. There was no charge-up, no glow, no warning. A single point along its hull opened, and something launched. Fast. Too fast. Tracking projectile, the AI began. Then stopped. Lost tracking. What do you mean lost? Elira snapped. It exceeded measurable velocity. A fraction of a second later, 3 Zarath warships exploded. Not from energy overload. Not from internal collapse. They were pierced. Straight through. Clean. Effortless. As if something had punched a hole through them and kept going. The battlefield went silent again. Not from shock. From confusion. The Zarath ships shifted slightly, their formation faltering as if trying to process what had just happened. That wasn't energy, the tactical officer said slowly. No, Elira replied. She stared at the damaged, burning warship as it continued its relentless advance. That was a weapon. Primitive. Brutal. Effective. The Zarath had spent centuries perfecting energy-based warfare, elegant, precise, unstoppable. But this was something else entirely. Something they hadn't prepared for. And that was the problem. Because for the first time in their long history, the Zarath didn't understand the battlefield anymore. And the unknown ship kept coming, slow, burning, unstoppable. Elira felt her pulse quicken, not from fear, but from something far more dangerous. Realization. This isn't just a ship, she whispered. Her eyes locked onto the name etched across its battered hull, letters from a language she didn't recognize, but somehow understood. Humanity. And as the warship pushed deeper into impossible odds, Elira realized something that sent a chill through her entire body. This wasn't the attack. This was the beginning. And whatever came next was going to be far worse. The human warship should have been dead. Every known model of survival, every calculation, every tactical simulation said the same thing. No vessel could endure that level of damage and remain operational. Not without shields, not without advanced regenerative systems. And yet it moved. Slowly burning, bleeding atmosphere into the void. But still moving. Commander Elira couldn't take her eyes off it. Structural integrity, she asked. Below 30% and dropping, the AI replied. Multiple decks compromised, power fluctuations across all systems. That ship is dying, her tactical officer said. Elira nodded faintly, yes. A pause. But it hasn't stopped. That was the part no one could explain. The Zarath fleet began to reposition, adjusting their formation with calculated precision. They had lost 3 ships, an almost insignificant number by their standards, but something had changed. Their movements were no longer flawless. There was hesitation, tiny gaps, micro-delays. They're reassessing, Elira observed. They're afraid, someone whispered. No, she said quietly. But even as she spoke, she wasn't entirely sure anymore. Suddenly, the comms station flickered. Incoming transmission, the officer said. Source the human vessel. Put it through, Elira ordered. Static erupted across the bridge, loud, uneven, like the signal itself was being torn apart as it traveled. Then voices broke through. Multiple voices. Human voices. We've lost pressure on Deck 6. Seal it now. They're targeting the reactor housing. I don't care, keep the guns online. The transmission crackled, distorted, overlapping with alarms and distant explosions. Elira's breath caught. They weren't automated. They weren't remote-controlled. There were living beings inside that ship. Still fighting. Still choosing to stay. Navigation's gone. Manual control, we're not stopping. A hull breach spreading. Then we move faster. The signal cut abruptly, replaced by silence. No one on the bridge spoke for several seconds. Finally, Elira said, "They're still operational." Her voice sounded different now, softer, heavier. "They shouldn't be," her tactical officer replied. "No," she agreed, "they shouldn't." The Zareth didn't wait any longer. Their fleet shifted again, this time surrounding the human ship completely. A perfect encirclement, no escape vectors, no blind spots. "They're preparing a full convergence strike," the AI said. "Estimated impact in 12 seconds. On the main display, energy began to build. Dozens of ships, all charging simultaneously. The light grew brighter, denser, warping the space around it. "They're going to erase it completely," someone said. Elira didn't respond. She was watching the human ship. Watching its trajectory. It wasn't trying to escape. It wasn't attempting evasive maneuvers. It was still moving forward. Straight toward the center of the Zareth formation. "That doesn't make sense," her tactical officer said. "They're boxed in, there's nowhere to go." "They're not trying to get out," Elira said quietly. "Then what are they doing?" The answer came a second later. The human ship turned. Not away from the enemy. Toward them. Directly toward the densest concentration of Zareth warships. "Course correction detected," the AI confirmed. "New trajectory collision path." Silence fell over the bridge. "They're not," the comms officer began. "Yes," Elira said. Her voice was steady now. "They are." The human ship's engines flared, uneven, unstable, but powerful. Trails of burning debris followed in its wake as it accelerated. Faster. Faster. Straight into the trap. "Are they insane?" someone whispered. Elira didn't answer immediately. Her gaze remained fixed on the screen, on that broken, defiant vessel charging into certain destruction. Then she spoke. "No." The word was quiet. "Certain. They're not insane." Another explosion ripped across the human ship's hull, one of the Zareth's preemptive strikes landing early. A section of the vessel sheared off, spinning away into space. Still, it didn't slow. The remaining engines roared harder, pushing the ship beyond what should have been physically possible. Inside the comms channel, a faint signal returned, barely audible through the interference. A single voice this time. "Calm. Focused. Hold together," it said, "just a little longer." Elira felt something tighten in her chest. "They know," she whispered. "They know they won't survive this." "Then why do it?" her officer asked. Elira didn't look away. Because the answer was right in front of her. "They're not trying to survive," she said. The Zareth weapons reached full charge. Light flooded the battlefield again. But this time, the human ship was already moving. Already committed. Already beyond the point of return. They're trying to take them with them. The realization hit the entire bridge at once. Not fear. Not shock. Something deeper. Something harder to name. The human warship surged forward, burning, breaking, unstoppable. And for the first time since the battle began, the Zareth formation began to fracture. Because they saw it too. And they understood too late. That this species didn't fight to live. They fought to make sure the enemy didn't. No matter the cost. Elira's voice dropped to a whisper as the human ship closed the final distance. Brace for impact. But deep down she knew. This wasn't just going to be an explosion. This was going to change everything. The human warship didn't slow. It couldn't. Not anymore. Its engines were burning themselves apart, overloaded, unstable, screaming against the limits of their design. Trails of molten debris scattered behind it like sparks from a dying star. But still, it accelerated. Commander Elira gripped the edge of her command console. Her eyes locked onto the rapidly closing distance between the human ship and the Zareth formation. Enemy weapons at full charge, the AI reported. Impact in 3 seconds. The light ahead was unbearable now. Dozens of Zareth warships focusing their firepower into a single, catastrophic strike. Space itself bent under the pressure, warping and distorting as if reality was trying to tear itself apart. "They can't survive that," the tactical officer whispered. "No," Elira said quietly. "They can't." The human ship surged forward. Closer. Closer. The comms system flickered again. Weak, fragmented. But still there. All hands brace. Reactor going critical. "We're not pulling out." A pause. Then one final voice, steady, unwavering. "For Earth." Elira felt her breath catch. The Zareth fired. The blast erupted outward in a blinding wave. Pure energy, concentrated destruction unleashed all at once. It swallowed the human ship completely, consuming it in a storm of light and heat and impossible force. For a fraction of a second, there was nothing. No ship. No movement. No signal. Just silence. Then, something broke through. Not intact. Not whole. But still moving. The human warship burst from the edge of the explosion, its structure barely holding together. Entire sections were gone, torn away by the blast. Fires raged across its exposed interior, venting atmosphere in violent bursts. But its trajectory hadn't changed. It was still on course. Still accelerating. Straight toward the center of the Zareth fleet. "That's impossible," someone whispered. "They should be gone." But they were. And now it was too late to stop them. The Zareth ships tried to adjust, pulling back, shifting formation, but their precision had faltered. The perfect coordination that had defined them was breaking under pressure. They hadn't accounted for this. They hadn't planned for an enemy that would keep coming no matter what. "Collision imminent," the AI announced. Elira didn't blink. Didn't breathe. The human ship closed the final distance in seconds. One last flicker of transmission cut through the noise, barely audible, lost beneath the roar of collapsing systems. It hold the line. Then, impact. The human warship slammed into the heart of the Zareth formation. For a single, suspended moment, nothing happened. The battlefield froze. Time itself seemed to hesitate. Then the reactor went critical. Not a controlled detonation. Not a clean burst of energy. This was something far more violent. Far more chaotic. The damaged core of the human ship collapsed inward before erupting outward in a catastrophic chain reaction. Energy tore through the surrounding space, ripping apart anything caught within its reach. 5 Zareth warships were annihilated instantly, reduced to fragments and vapor in less than a second. 7 more were crippled, their systems overloaded, their hulls shattered. The shockwave expanded rapidly, slamming into nearby vessels, disrupting formations, breaking their perfect alignment. The battlefield shattered. Elira's ship rocked violently as the wave passed, alarms blaring across the bridge. "Stabilize," she shouted. "All systems hold position." The light began to fade. Slowly, revealing the aftermath. Where the Zareth formation had once been flawless, precise, unstoppable, there was now chaos. Gaps, wreckage, drifting debris. "They broke them," the tactical officer said, his voice trembling. "With one ship." Elira stared at the destruction, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. One vessel. One crew. And they had done this. Not with superior technology. Not with overwhelming force. But with something else. Something the Zareth had never encountered before. A willingness to sacrifice everything. Her gaze drifted to the empty space where the human warship had been. Gone now. Completely gone. No signal. No debris large enough to identify. Just absence. "They knew," she whispered. "They knew this would happen. No one replied, because there was nothing to say. The silence that followed was heavier than anything that had come before. Even the Zareth fleet seemed to pause again, uncertain, disrupted, no longer moving with the same cold precision. For the first time, they weren't in control, and that was when the sensors lit up again. Bright, sudden, overwhelming. "Commander," the AI said, its voice almost strained. "Multiple new contacts detected." Elira turned sharply. "Where?" "At the edge of the system." The display shifted, zooming out, scanning the far reaches of space. At first, it looked like interference. Distortion. Then the signals multiplied. 1, 10, 50, hundreds. Elira felt her pulse quicken. "Identify them." The AI paused, then answered. "Unknown." Another pause, but matching the same signature as the previous vessel. The bridge fell silent again. But this time, it wasn't fear. Elira leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as the first shapes began to emerge from the distortion. Ships. Many ships. Different sizes. Different designs. All moving toward the battlefield. Her voice dropped to a whisper. That wasn't an attack. She watched as the incoming fleet forced its way into reality itself. That was a signal. And suddenly, everything made sense. The war had just begun. The battlefield hadn't recovered from the explosion. It didn't have time to. At the far edge of the system, space itself began to distort, subtly at first, like heat ripples across glass. Then violently. The fabric of reality bent inward, folding, tearing under pressure that didn't follow any known form of travel. Commander Elira leaned forward, her voice tight. "That's not warp." "No," the AI replied. "It's forcing entry manually." "Manually," her tactical officer echoed. "You can't just force your way through space." But something was. The distortion widened, splitting open like a wound, and from within it the first ship emerged. It was human. There was no mistaking it now. Angular armored, scarred, and moving fast. Then another followed. And another. Within seconds, the void filled with them. Dozens, then scores, then hundreds of ships pouring into the battlefield like a flood that refused to be contained. Elira's breath caught. They weren't alone. They were never alone, the AI corrected quietly. Each ship was different. Some were massive, towering warships bristling with heavy weaponry, their hulls marked with deep scars from previous battles. Others were smaller, faster, sleek in a crude, aggressive way, built for speed and impact rather than elegance. None of them looked untouched. None of them looked perfect. But every single one of them moved with purpose. The Zareth fleet reacted immediately. "Enemy reinforcements detected," their commander broadcast, his voice sharper now. "All units reform and engage." But something was off. Their formation didn't snap into place like before. There was a delay. A fraction of a second. Then another. "They're slower," Elira said, barely above a whisper. "They're compensating for the disruption," her tactical officer replied. "No," she said, shaking her head slightly. "They're uncertain." Because what had just entered the battlefield didn't behave like anything they had fought before. The first human ships didn't stop. Didn't form ranks. Didn't wait for coordination. They charged. Straight into the fractured Zareth lines. "Multiple weapon signatures detected," the AI said rapidly. "Missile systems, kinetic batteries, high-yield warheads." The void erupted. Missiles streaked forward in chaotic swarms, weaving unpredictably through space. Solid projectiles slammed into Zareth ships with brutal force, tearing through hulls that had been designed to resist energy weapons, not impact. Explosions followed, violent, uneven, overwhelming. It wasn't precise. It wasn't controlled. It was relentless. "They're not targeting strategically," the tactical officer said. "They're just overwhelming them," Elira finished. Another human ship surged forward, taking direct hits from Zareth fire. Its armor buckled, sections tearing away under the assault. Still, it didn't pull back. Instead, it accelerated, closing the distance. "What is it doing?" someone asked. Elira's eyes widened slightly. "Watch." The ship didn't fire, didn't evade. It drove straight into a Zareth cruiser and collided. The impact shattered both vessels in a violent explosion that sent debris scattering in every direction. The bridge fell silent. "They're using their ships as weapons," the comms officer said, stunned. "That's not a tactic," another added. "No," Elira said quietly. "It's a choice." Across the battlefield, similar scenes unfolded. Human vessels pushing past the limits of survivability, taking damage, losing systems, and still pressing forward. One ship launched its entire missile payload at point-blank range before detonating alongside its target. Another, engines failing, redirected its remaining power into a final kinetic strike, crippling a Zareth warship twice its size. It wasn't clean warfare. It wasn't efficient. But it worked. The Zareth fleet began to lose cohesion. Their formations fractured further, ships pulling out of position to avoid unpredictable attacks. "They can't calculate this," the AI said. "Human tactics are inconsistent." "They're not inconsistent," Elira replied. She watched as a damaged human frigate veered sharply, intercepting a Zareth attack aimed at a weaker allied ship, taking the full force of the blast and disintegrating in the process. "They're deliberate." Her gaze hardened. "They just don't care about the same things." The realization spread across the bridge like a quiet shock. The Zareth fought to dominate, to win, to maintain superiority. But these humans, they fought differently. They fought like survival wasn't enough. Like winning wasn't the goal. "They're fighting to end it," Elira said. Another wave of human ships surged forward, filling the gaps left by those that had fallen. No hesitation. No retreat. Only forward. The Zareth commander's voice cut across the battlefield again, this time louder, sharper, carrying something new beneath the surface. "Maintain formation, regain control, they are inferior." His words were cut off as another explosion tore through his front line. More ships lost. More gaps. More chaos. Elira felt it now, clearly, undeniably. The shift. The turning point. For the first time since the battle began, the Zareth Dominion was being pushed back. Not by superior technology. Not by better strategy. But by something far more dangerous. Something they had never prepared for. Something they didn't understand. Elira's voice dropped to a quiet whisper as she watched the relentless human advance. "They're not afraid to die." Another explosion lit the void. Another Zareth ship fell. And the humans kept coming. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "They're afraid of letting the enemy live." And in that moment, she knew the truth. The ship that had arrived first hadn't come to win the battle. It had come to change it. To show the galaxy what humanity was willing to do. And now, there were hundreds more just like it. The Zareth weren't fighting a fleet anymore. They were fighting a species that refused to stop. The battlefield stopped feeling like a battlefield. It became something else. Something louder, closer, brutal in a way that stripped away distance and turned the cold vacuum of space into something almost intimate. Commander Elira watched as the neat lines of combat dissolved completely. There were no formations anymore. No predictable movements. Only motion, chaotic, relentless motion. Human ships dove into enemy fire as if it didn't matter. Some spiraled out of control, venting atmosphere and debris, only to correct their course at the last second and slam into Zareth vessels with devastating force. "They're collapsing the engagement range," the tactical officer said. "They're forcing close-quarters combat." "Why?" another officer asked. "That puts them at a disadvantage." Elira shook her head slowly, eyes still fixed on the unfolding chaos. "No," she said, It removes the Zarath advantage. At long range, the Zarath were perfect, precise, calculating, untouchable. Up close, precision meant less, and unpredictability meant everything. A human destroyer surged past Elira's field of view, its hull torn open, internal decks exposed to space. Fires burned along its spine, flickering wildly in the vacuum. Life signs? Elira asked instinctively. Minimal but present, the AI replied. They're still fighting, the comms officer said in disbelief. Before anyone could respond, the destroyer veered sharply, directly toward a Zarath cruiser preparing to fire. No, the tactical officer whispered. The destroyer didn't slow. Didn't hesitate. At the last possible moment, its remaining weapons fired, a desperate barrage that forced the cruiser's shields to flare. Then the human ship hit. The collision was violent, uneven, metal tearing against energy, force meeting force. The resulting explosion consumed both vessels, leaving nothing but fragments and expanding fire. Silence fell over the bridge for a heartbeat. They didn't even try to escape, someone said. They didn't need to, Elira replied. Her voice was steady now. Colder. They achieved their objective. Across the battlefield, more human ships pushed forward, each one fighting as if it were alone, yet somehow part of something larger. No central command structure. No visible coordination. And yet it worked. How are they synchronizing? The tactical officer asked. There's no unified signal pattern. The AI processed for a moment. They are. What do you mean they are? They're operating independently, individual decision-making across all units. That's impossible, someone said. That would create total disarray. Elira's gaze hardened. Then why does it look like control? No one answered. Because the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. This wasn't disorder. This was intent. Human ships didn't wait for orders. They reacted, adapted, chose. Every pilot, every crew member making decisions in real time. Decisions the Zarath couldn't predict because they weren't following a fixed pattern. They were following something else. Instinct, emotion, will. Another transmission flickered through the comms, weak, fragmented, but clear enough. We've lost propulsion. Redirect power to forward thrusters. We're not getting out of this. A pause. Then quieter. Make it count. Elira closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. When she opened them, a damaged human cruiser drifted into view. Engines dark. Weapons offline. Barely holding together. It was dead in the water. A Zarath capital ship moved toward it, massive, untouched, its weapons charging for a clean, effortless kill. This is it, the tactical officer said. They're finished. But the human cruiser moved. Not fast, not cleanly, but deliberately. It rotated slowly, aligning its broken hull with the approaching capital ship. What is it doing? Someone asked. Elira didn't answer. She already knew. The cruiser's comms activated one final time. A single voice, calm, exhausted, unwavering. Tell them we held the line. Then the reactor spiked. Energy surged through the dying ship, building beyond safe limits, beyond containment. The Zarath vessel tried to pull away, but it was too late. The explosion was massive. A violent, expanding sphere of fire and force that swallowed the cruiser and the capital ship together. When it cleared, both were gone. The bridge was silent. Completely silent. Elira stared at the empty space where they had been. They chose that, she said softly. Not to anyone in particular. Just statting it. They chose to end their own lives, to stop the enemy. No one argued. No one could. Because it wasn't an isolated act. It was happening everywhere. Human ships pushing past damage, past fear, past survival itself, turning every loss into a weapon. Turning every death into momentum. The Zarath fleet was faltering now. Not collapsing. Not yet, but braking. Their movements were slower, less precise, hesitant. Why won't they brake? A distorted Zareth transmission echoed across the battlefield. Why do they keep coming? Elira listened to the question, felt its weight, then answered it quietly, even though they couldn't hear her. Because they've already accepted the cost. Her eyes returned to the battlefield, burning, chaotic, alive with destruction. And you haven't. Another wave of human ships surged forward. Not stopping, not retreating, only advancing. And for the first time, the Zareth Dominion was no longer fighting to win. They were fighting to survive. And they were losing. It didn't happen all at once. The Zareth Dominion did not shatter in a single moment of defeat. They bent first, subtly, almost imperceptibly, like a structure under pressure that refuses to admit it is failing. But Commander Elira saw it. She saw it in the way their formations no longer locked perfectly into place. In the way their ships hesitated before committing to attack vectors. In the way their once flawless timing began to slip. They're pulling back, her tactical officer said quietly. At first it looked like repositioning, an attempt to regain control of the battlefield. But the longer Elira watched, the clearer it became. No, she said, her voice low, they're retreating. The word felt unreal. The Zareth did not retreat. In centuries of recorded conflict, they had never withdrawn from a battlefield. Their doctrine was absolute, dominate or annihilate. There was no middle ground. And yet now they were falling back. Not in formation, not in control, but in fragments. They're breaking, someone whispered. Across the void, Zareth ships began to disengage, pulling away from the chaotic storm of human attacks. Some attempted to regroup at a distance. Others simply turned and fled outright, engines flaring as they tried to escape the nightmare closing around them. Human ships pursued without hesitation. No mercy. No pause. They're chasing them down, the comms officer said. Of course they are, Elira replied. Because this wasn't just a battle anymore. This was something personal. A sudden surge of energy lit up the far side of the battlefield. Commander, massive power spike detected, the AI warned. Zareth flagship is charging a primary weapon. Elira's attention snapped to the display. At the center of the retreating fleet, the largest Zareth vessel, vast, monolithic, untouched by most of the fighting, began to glow with building energy. The space around it distorted violently as power levels climbed beyond anything previously recorded. What kind of weapon is that? Her tactical officer asked. The AI processed for a moment, then responded, its voice strained. Unknown configuration, but output suggests a system-wide annihilation event. Silence fell. Elira felt her chest tighten. They're going to destroy everything, she said. Not just the human fleet. Not just the remaining allies. Everything. The shattered moon. The debris field. Every ship still in the system. They'd rather erase the battlefield than lose it, someone said in disbelief. Yes, Elira replied. Because that was who the Zareth were. Control or nothing. The energy continued to build, faster now, brighter, more unstable. Time to discharge, she asked. Less than 2 minutes. That's not enough time to evacuate, the comms officer said. No, Elira said quietly. It is. Across the battlefield, human ships began to react. At first it was scattered, individual vessels adjusting course, redirecting power, shifting positions. Then it became something more. They moved together. Not in perfect formation, but with shared intent. They see it, Elira said. A wave of human ships surged forward, abandoning pursuit of retreating Zareth vessels and redirecting toward the charging flagship. What are they doing? Her tactical officer asked. Elira didn't hesitate this time. They're going to stop it. How? Someone demanded. That weapon will vaporize anything that gets close. But the humans didn't slow. Didn't reconsider. They accelerated. Every available ship, damaged, burning, barely operational, pushed forward into the path of the incoming destruction. "They're forming a barrier," the AI said. And they were. A wall of human ships, hundreds of them, positioning themselves between the Zareth flagship and the rest of the system. Not to attack. Not yet. But to hold. To absorb the blast, the comms officer asked, horrified. "No," Elira said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the weight of what she was seeing. To buy time. The Zareth weapon continued to charge. Energy spiraled outward, distorting space into something unrecognizable. Human ships took positions, locking in, stabilizing, preparing for impact. Some were already failing, engines cutting out, hulls breaking apart, but they held their place anyway. "They know they won't survive this," the tactical officer said. "Yes," Elira replied. "They do." A deep, heavy silence settled over the bridge. Not fear. Not panic. Something else. Respect. Because this wasn't desperation. This was choice. The Zareth flagship reached critical charge. 30 seconds, the AI announced. The human line held. Weapons fired intermittently. Not enough to stop the charge, but enough to disrupt, to interfere, to slow. But it wouldn't be enough. Not alone. Then, a new signal appeared. Different. Stronger. "Commander," the AI said, its voice almost uncertain. "One human battleship is breaking formation." Elira's eyes snapped to the display. There it was. Larger than the others. Heavily armored, but barely holding together. Its hull scarred, engines flickering, systems clearly on the edge of total failure. "What is it doing?" the tactical officer asked. The answer came immediately. "It's accelerating." Toward what? Elira didn't look away. Toward the flagship. The realization hit the bridge all at once. "No," someone whispered. But it was already happening. The battleship surged forward, pushing past the defensive line, leaving the relative safety of the formation behind. Its engines flared brighter, unstable, overdriven, tearing themselves apart as it forced more speed. "Why would they send it alone?" the comms officer asked. "They didn't send it," Elira said quietly. "It chose to go." The Zareth weapon reached its final phase. Energy peaked. The entire system trembled under the strain. And the lone human battleship kept going. Straight into the heart of it all. Elira's voice dropped to a whisper. "They're not trying to block the weapon." Her eyes narrowed, understanding dawning fully now. "They're trying to stop it at the source." The distance closed rapidly. Seconds remained. The battlefield held its breath. Because everyone, human, Zareth, ally, knew what was about to happen. And no one could stop it. The battleship surged forward one last time. Broken, burning, unstoppable. And as it closed in on the Zareth flagship, Elira felt something she hadn't felt since the battle began. Not fear, not hope, something heavier, something final. This was the moment everything would be decided. The human battleship didn't slow. It couldn't. Its engines were already past failure, overloaded beyond safe limits, tearing themselves apart with every second of thrust. Sections of its hull peeled away under the strain, trailing fire and debris like a comet racing toward its end. But it stayed on course, straight toward the Zareth flagship. Commander Elira stood frozen, her eyes locked on the closing distance displayed before her. "Time to weapon discharge?" she asked. 8 seconds, the AI replied. Not enough. Not even close. The Zareth flagship loomed ahead, vast, radiant, surrounded by the violent distortion of its charging weapon. Energy spiraled around it in blinding arcs, warping space so severely that the ship itself seemed to flicker in and out of reality. "They won't make it," the tactical officer said. Elira didn't answer. Because the human battleship wasn't trying to make it. It was trying to finish something. A transmission burst across the battlefield, clear, strong, cutting through every channel. The source was the human ship. The entire system heard it. You wanted war. The voice was calm. Not angry. Not desperate. Certain. Elira felt her breath catch. The battleship pushed forward, engines screaming, structure failing, systems collapsing one by one. The Zareth flagship began to react, shields intensifying, weapon charge spiking as they tried to accelerate the firing sequence. 5 seconds, the AI said. Human ships behind the battleship surged forward as well, firing everything they had, missiles, kinetic rounds, anything to disrupt the flagship systems. But the weapon was too far along. Too powerful. Nothing they fired would stop it in time. Only one thing would. The battleship transmitted again. Now you understand us. And then, it hit. The collision wasn't clean. It wasn't precise. It was violent. Chaotic. The human battleship slammed into the Zareth flagship just as the weapon reached peak charge. For a single, suspended instant, everything stopped. Sound, light, motion, as if the entire system had paused to witness the moment. Then, the reaction began. The unstable energy of the Zareth weapon collapsed inward, disrupted by the sudden impact. The containment fields fractured, unable to stabilize the overload. The flagship's core surged, cracked, and detonated. The explosion was unlike anything that had come before. Not a simple blast, but a cascading failure of energy and matter, a chain reaction that tore through the flagship and everything around it. Light consumed the center of the battlefield, expanding outward in a massive sphere of destruction. Human ships scattered, pulling back just in time to avoid the worst of it. Zareth vessels caught too close were annihilated instantly. When the light finally began to fade, the flagship was gone. Completely. No debris. No signal. Nothing. The weapon had died with it. Silence followed. Deep. Absolute. Commander Elira stared at the empty space, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. They stopped it, her tactical officer said softly. Yes, Elira replied. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly at her sides. They did. Across the battlefield, the remaining Zareth ships faltered. Leaderless. Disoriented. For a moment they hovered, uncertain, as if waiting for commands that would never come. Then, they turned, one by one, and fled. They're retreating, the comms officer said, almost in disbelief. No, Elira said quietly. They're running. And this time, there was no hesitation in her voice. No doubt, the Zareth Dominion, unstoppable, undefeated, was retreating from the battlefield. Because of them. Because of what they had just seen. The human fleet didn't pursue immediately. They held position, damaged ships stabilizing, survivors regrouping, the chaos slowly settling into something quieter. Something heavier. Elira exhaled slowly, her gaze drifting across the wreckage. There was so much of it. Human ships gone. Entire crews lost. The battlefield was littered with the cost of what had just been done. They knew, she said softly. They knew what it would take. No one argued. Because it was obvious now. Every action, every sacrifice, every impossible decision. It had all been leading here. Not to survive, not just to win, but to make sure the enemy could never do this again. A faint signal appeared on the comms. Weak, but steady. Receiving transmission, the officer said. Human origin. Play it, Elira said. The message came through, simple, unpolished, carried on damaged systems barely holding together. A voice spoke. Tired, but alive. We're still here. Elira closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again, staring out at the silent battlefield. That was it. No declaration of victory. No demand for recognition. just survival. After everything, they were still here. Her voice dropped to a whisper. That's what makes them dangerous. Around her, the stars burned quietly. The war for now was over. But something had changed. Not just the battlefield. Not just the outcome. The understanding. The truth. Because now the galaxy knew. Not what humans could build. Not what weapons they carried. But what they were willing to do. Elira straightened slightly, her expression firm. Signal the fleet, she said. Stand down, begin recovery operations. A pause. Then softer. And remember this. Her eyes remained fixed on the void where the final battleship had vanished. Because that was where the answer lived. Not in power. Not in technology. But in something far more dangerous. Something the Zarath had learned too late. What it means to be human.